jail for something I did not do. Please file a murder weapon and then get real person. For real. What the you waiting for?
We've come like a joint effort. She was heavy. We just put it in. The water was turned on.
At some point in time, you did realize that morning your mom was dead.
Yeah.
I was like a dormant volcano, one that erupted at age 13, resulting in me taking the life of an innocent woman.
Leaundra and Lemae Matthews, Catherine and Curtis Jackson, Tasmiyah and Jasmiyah Whitehead, 3 sets of siblings who shocked the world with their violent betrayals. Some acted out of deep-seated trauma, others out of pure rage, but in each case, their shared connection turned dark, leading to unspeakable horror. Leaundra and Lemae Matthews brutally executed a deadly plot to eliminate their own brother. Catherine and Curtis Jackson were just 12 and 13 when they carried out a shocking revenge killing, making them the youngest convicted murderers in U.S. history. And Tasmiyah and Jasmiyah Whitehead, they turned on their own mother in a fit of rage, staging a crime scene to cover up their violent betrayal. These were not random acts of violence. They were deliberate, calculated, and fueled by emotions too intense to be contained. What led these siblings to commit such heinous crimes? And exactly what moment did they go from sweet kids to vicious murderers? These are the stories of the twisted twins who commit vicious murder in revenge.
He was in the kitchen and I was sitting at the table. I already knew it was fixing to happen. We had already talked about it, and she was sitting at the other dining room table. And he shot her in the chest. And she tried to grab the phone, and I went and took the phone.
Christian Matthews was just a teenager when his twin sisters, Leaundra and Lemae Matthews, decided he had to go. Leaundra and Lemae were 25 years old at the time, and to this day, it is still unclear what their motivations were. Did they secretly resent him for some reason? Had he hurt them in some way? What could lead sisters to put a plan to unalive their brother alive in motion? According to Leaundra, she had never felt safe with Christian in the home, she told investigators, and anyone who would listen, really Christian had hurt her and her daughter, and she couldn't take it anymore, so he had to go, and they made sure he did. On March 21, 2017, Montgomery County Police arrived at a home in Silver Spring, Maryland, after receiving a 911 call. Inside, they found 17-year-old Christian Matthews unresponsive. He was rushed to the hospital, but doctors quickly confirmed what was already clear. Christian was gone. The first thing officers noted when they walked into the Silver Spring home and saw Christian lying there was the bruising around his neck. They filed that little detail away initially to focus on saving Christian, but when he was pronounced dead, they sent for an autopsy. With that bruising around his neck, they knew he didn't just choke on his own and pass away. Someone wanted him gone. When the autopsy results came back, the truth was undeniable. Cause of death was asphyxia, manner of death, homicide. Christian hadn't just died, he had been murdered. And the most chilling part? The person responsible was someone he trusted, someone he thought would protect him, his own sister, Leaundra and Lemae Matthews. Within the first 24 hours after Christian was unalived, Leaundra and Lemae were questioned by the cops about what happened, and they played the part of the concerned sister to a T. When asked what they had seen, Leaundra claimed she had been upstairs in her bedroom when she suddenly heard a commotion in the basement. She told cops she went down to find out what all the noise was all about, and that's when she saw Christian just laying there, so she called 911. Lemae's story was the same as her sister's. All their T's were dotted and I's were lined, but something smelled off to the cops. Their stories matched up perfectly, almost too perfect. The detectives weren't buying it. Something about the scene felt staged, and then there was the bruising around Christian's neck that told a different tale than what the twins were telling. When they started digging, the horrifying truth revealed itself. 2 years after the murder, Leaundra's boyfriend, Trevon Lipford, visited the Montgomery County Police Station and shocked the investigators with what he had to say. They always suspected whoever unalived Christian had to be close to home given the time of the murder and the fact that there was no forced entry. Trevon cracked and admitted everything. He told investigators it wasn't a crime of passion. It was calculated, planned down to the smallest detail. He told investigators Christian had been marked for death because he had threatened to harm Leaundra and her child. Instead of going to authorities, instead of seeking help, Leaundra decided to take matters into her own hands. She got her twin sister Lemae and her boyfriend Trayvon in on the plan. She didn't just want him gone, she orchestrated his execution. Investigators found text messages between Leaundra and Trayvon revealed just how deeply involved she was. She had a plan, a time, a method, and she wasn't going to let anyone mess it up. Trayvon initially wanted to set the plan they had for Christian in motion earlier in the night, but Leaundra shut that down. "And y'all idea is not a good idea, trust me," she texted him. "I'm not gonna let y'all do it if y'all don't do it how I said, 'cause it's a whole bunch of stuff y'all ain't think about." It was clear to the investigators that Leaundra was the one in control. She had thought everything through, everyone else was just doing her bidding. She insisted they wait until later in the night, when fewer neighbors would be awake, fewer eyes to witness what they were about to do. When the time came for them to put their sinister plan in motion, Leaundra picked up Trayvon and another accomplice, Calvin Howard, and brought them to her house. She didn't stop there. She made sure the plan went off without a hitch. She unlocked the back door, she left out disposable gloves for them to use, and she told them to break a window and ransack the house to make it look like a robbery. Then they waited. They waited outside until Christian fell asleep, and when the moment came, they struck. After the horrific crime, Leaundra met up with Trayvon and Calvin nearby, drove them away from the crime scene, and dropped them back off where she had picked them up earlier. She returned home and went right into playing the role of the devastated sister. For 2 years, while they investigated the murder of her brother, she kept the secret. No guilt, no remorse, just silence. Then, in 2019, the truth finally came out. But not because Leaundra felt guilty about what she did to her own brother. It was because Trayvon was done keeping her secret, and he was going to confess. Leaundra decided to get ahead of that and admitted everything to her mother and aunt. No tears, no regret. She was cold, emotionless, straight-faced, according to the affidavit. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She didn't break down in tears. She simply said it had to be done. He had to go because he wasn't going to stop. Her mother was horrified and asked if the plan had only been to hurt Christian, if maybe it had gone too far. But she said a firm no. The outcome had been intentional. Leaundra Matthews didn't just unalive her brother. She made sure it happened exactly how she wanted it. And she never looked back. Unfortunately, Leaundra and Lemae Matthews' case is not an isolated one. Like Leaundra and Lemae, Catherine and Curtis Jackson also shared an unshakable bond. Siblings are often thought to share an unbreakable bond, one built on loyalty, trust, and an almost telepathic connection. But what happens when that connection turns dark?
I was like a dormant volcano, one that erupted at age 13, resulting in me taking the life of an innocent woman.
These are Catherine and Curtis Jackson. When Catherine was 13 years old and Curtis was only 12, they were both tried and sentenced as adults, becoming the youngest people in U.S. history to be tried and sentenced as adults. According to the law, they had committed first-degree murder, but what was going on behind the scenes that led to them committing those murders was beyond heartbreaking. Unfortunately, no one bothered to look. Catherine and Curtis had endured horrific attacks and mistreatments for years until one day they had enough and snapped. And on that day, Catherine and Curtis Jr. directed all their pent-up anger and rage at their father's girlfriend. And in a moment of extreme rage, they put together a sinister plan. A plan that ended with them in handcuffs at just 12 and 13 years old.
He was in the kitchen and I was sitting at the table. I already knew it was fixing to happen. We had already talked about it, and she was sitting at the other dining room table. And he shot her in the chest. And she tried to grab the phone and I went and took the phone.
In 1985, in Florida, Curtis Jackson and Stacey Parks welcomed their first child, Catherine. The following year, Curtis Jr. was born. To outsiders, they appeared to be a young, happy family, but the reality was far from perfect. Curtis Sr. was violent, and he had begun to strike Stacey long before the children arrived. When Stacy was pregnant with Catherine, Curtis Sr. struck her so severely that her uterus ruptured, forcing an emergency delivery. That was only the beginning. By 1989, Stacy couldn't take it anymore. She fled to her parents' home in Kansas, leaving behind her 2 young children with the hope of reuniting with them one day, a day that would never come. One could ask why Stacy didn't take her kids with her if she knew the type of man Curtis Sr. was. Why did she love those children there? You see, when most women who have been brutalized finally leave, it is not an ideal situation. Oftentimes, they're desperate to at least get to safety first before going back for whatever or whomever they left behind. Stacy Parks had no way of nowhere. She was dooming her 2 little children to a fate worse than death. Catherine and Curtis Jr. remained in the custody of their father, and for a time, seemed to care for them. Photos from those years show smiling children, but behind closed doors, the reality was different. Curtis Sr. soon invited a male relative to live with them. Whether it was for financial reasons or companionship is unknown, but what is certain is that this man became a nightmare for the Jackson children. From the time Catherine was in kindergarten, the relatives started coming into her room at night and doing unspeakable things to her, and she wasn't the only victim. Catherine and Curtis Jr. were always close, bound by a sense of survival in an unstable home. But when they realized they were both suffering the same horrors at the hands of this man, they clung to each other even tighter. They swore they would escape together, no matter what it took. They waited for someone to come save them. But as time passed, they soon realized no one was coming to save them, and they were going to have to do it themselves. If you were wondering why Catherine and Curtis Jackson never said anything about what they were going through to anyone, they did, several times, and each time, they were sent back to their nightmare.
At one point, I was just so happy to be away. You know, and I know that sounds really, really messed up, but there was just some point where I was just away from all that, and I was by myself, and I was safe.
Between 1994 and 1998, child safety investigations were launched 3 times. The first 2 were triggered when Curtis Jr. confided in his mother about what was happening to him, while the third followed Catherine's heartbreaking account. But each time, Curtis Sr. defended his relative, denying the accusations, and the cases were dropped due to lack of evidence. They did everything they were supposed to do in this situation. They talked to several adults to make it stop, yet the system continued to fail them. Even after investigators discovered that the relative had a history of saying a 14-year-old girl, he was still allowed to remain in the home and carry on his horrifying actions. At some point, HRS got involved, and Catherine thought this was it. Someone would finally care enough to remove them from their nightmare, but that was not the case. Catherine had run away from home, which triggered a visit from HRS, but because she reported the case alone without the account of her brother, it meant they would remove only her from the home, and thought of what that meant sent shivers to her spine. Curtis Jr. remaining in that home alone meant the relative had easy access to him and no one to stop him. She couldn't bear the thought of her brother going through all of that alone, so she changed her story, telling HRS she made it up.
I didn't know that it was both until it did happen. And when I finally did tell my family, I think it was the second or third time I ran away from home, and HRS got involved. And when they said that they would take us out of the house, I denied it. I said, no, never mind. I don't want to push through with this, even though, in the report, they said there were indicators of abuse. And my brother told me he believed me. He said, I know it's true because it's happened to me too.
At a separate time, Curtis also had HRS involved, but withdrew his statement when he found out they were planning to take only him out of the home. So why did the Jackson children keep changing their stories when questioned? Because every case was based on just one of them, meaning if one child was removed from the home, they would be separated. No matter how unbearable life was, they refused to be apart. By 1999, the household consisted of Curtis Sr., his abusive relative, and his new girlfriend, 29-year-old Sonia Nicole Spates, a teaching assistant with a bright smile who turned a blind eye to the horrors happening in that home, which only fueled the children's rage. Days after the latest investigation was closed, Catherine was taking a shower when the relative entered the bathroom, pulled back the curtain, and began helping himself right in front of her. She crouched in the corner, sobbing, until he finished. Before leaving, he placed 50 cents on the toilet seat, adding insult to years of injury. That was the final straw. That night, Catherine wrote in her diary, "I'm going to kill everyone." She shared her plan with Curtis Jr. They wouldn't just kill their abuser, they would kill everyone who had allowed it to happen. On January 6, 1999, they put their plan into motion. Curtis Jr. fired several shots at Sonia until she stopped moving. But as he trembled in shock, the reality of what they had done dawned on Catherine, so she took the firearm and fired the last 2 bullets outside, ensuring no one else could be harmed. Then, she wiped it clean.
I actually took the fingerprints off the gun and wiped it down. And I told my brother that he got hysterical. He had an emotional breakdown because, once again, this is reality now. This isn't some idea that's in our head anymore. This is reality.
Then the siblings called 911, claiming the murder was an accident, and fled into the night. When the cops caught them the next morning, the children were in shock. Catherine was ready to take the blame for Curtis, but he refused to let her. He confessed to the murder, thinking it would protect them both.
I was trying to calm him down, and we ended up leaving the house because of all the blood and stuff that was everywhere. And I called my best friend, and she came, and we went to her house, and then we went to another friend's house. And I had told my brother, if anything happens, I did it. You didn't have anything to do with it.
But their ordeal was far from over. They were charged as adults. The defense painted a picture of 2 children failed by every adult in their lives, 3 prior child abuse investigations, their mother's heart-wrenching testimony, and even reports of bruises seen by visitors. But it wasn't enough.
It was obvious to me that he was just a little boy in absolute shock and very concerned, extremely scared, and wanting, the comforts of home. There's no way that these kids should have been sentenced as adults. They should have been sentenced as juveniles.
The prosecution argued they were jealous, that they had killed Sonia for attention. At just 13, Catherine was offered a deal, but she refused to take a lighter sentence than her brother.
There was a chance that they were saying that maybe I could go home if I testified earlier than my brother, and I was like, no way, because, I'm the reason that he's in this predicament. And what they wanted me to do is not take responsibility, which would have been a lie.
When Curtis was sentenced to 22 years and she was given 18, she insisted he serve the same. In the end, both were sentenced to 18 years in prison, plus lifelong probation. And at just 12 and 13, they were sent to adult prisons, separated and barred from contacting each other. That broke them faster than the sentences they were slapped with.
We're best friends. Nobody understands what you go through in here but somebody else that's in here. And I think that's the worst thing they could do to me right now.
Catherine spent her first 3 years in solitary confinement. Magazine headlines labeled her a super predator, a term rooted in racial bias that led to disproportionately harsh sentences for Black children. Instead of receiving therapy and education, they were thrown into a system that saw them as lost causes.
I heard the term super predator used to describe me. I felt dehumanized, like I was no longer a child, that everything innocent and pure about me was stripped away and replaced by these demeaning, derogatory labels that were used to justify treating me in an inhumane, cruel, and unjust way.
For years, Catherine showed no emotion. Prison felt safer than her home ever had.
The one thing that really caught us was she didn't seem to have, and I don't want to say remorse, but she had a very cold effect. I mean, as far as not really an emotional side to her that we could find.
But 5 years into her sentence, she began to process what she had done. She had to relive her trauma, confront her actions, and accept responsibility.
I was the ultimate actress, a professional at being a A+ student, social butterfly, perfect kid on the outside, while inside dealing with the pain of the sexual abuse that I was experiencing from the age 5 to the date of my incarceration.
Things eventually began to look up for Catherine while she was in prison. She met and married a Navy officer, Senior Chief Ramus Fleming, who became her pen pal after reading her story. In 2016, at age 30, she was released. Curtis followed a year later and became an ordained minister. Ashley Nellis, a senior research analyst, called their story one of the greatest failings of the child welfare and justice systems. They had multiple chances to escape their nightmare, The system had multiple opportunities to save them, but no one did. Today, the siblings are reunited and working toward building new lives. Ramus left the Navy to support Catherine as she adjusted to modern life, learning how to use social media, drive a car, and apply for jobs after missing out on 2 decades of freedom.
I see myself as a champion for those that I left behind, the very women who nurtured me and became surrogate mothers to me inside the prison system.
Their abuser, there's little record of what became of him.
This was an act of rage. It was the 2 girls had planned for this event.
Imagine waking up one day, going about your morning routine, and then deciding to end your own mother's life. That's exactly what happened on January 13th, 2010, when twin sisters Taz and Jazz Whitehead brutally murdered their mom, cleaned up, and then casually went to school like nothing happened. At first, they played the grieving daughters, even calling 911 and spinning an elaborate web of lies. But when detectives started putting the pieces together, it all unraveled, and when they finally confessed, the reason they gave for the murder was just as disturbing as the crime itself.
I'm not going down for something I did not do. Please file a murder with me, and then get real personal. For real. What the f*** waiting for?
17-year-old Nikki Whitehead was young when she had her twin daughters, Taz and Jazz. Because of her situation, she wasn't able to raise them at first, so their great-grandmother, Della Frazier, stepped in. For the first 13 years of their lives, the twins lived with Della, where they had little to no rules. But Nikki always dreamed of giving her daughters a better life. So, when the girls turned 13, she fought for custody and moved them to Conyers, Georgia. She wanted to give them opportunities she never had, signing them up for music and dance classes, making sure they were on track to go to college. From the outside, it seemed like a picture-perfect family.
She definitely didn't want them to go in the same direction, that the path that she went down.
But inside, things were starting to crack. The twins had a hard time adjusting to Nikki's rules. Suddenly, they weren't allowed to date older boys, stay out late, or do whatever they wanted, and they hated it.
It was difficult for them to start hearing and accepting, the word no. As Nikki became more stern, that's just something that they couldn't get used to.
At first, it was just arguments, but then things started getting violent. One day, Nikki was so scared after an argument that she called the police. Officer Myra Scruggs responded and immediately noticed something chilling. Nikki looked terrified of her own daughters.
The girls seem very innocent, very sweet. But the look in Nikki's face, she was fearful of those children. She knew that they worked together.
And her fear wasn't unfounded. After the police left that night, Nikki called 911 again, this time screaming that the girls had attacked her. The twins claimed it was self-defense, but there was a problem with their story. Nikki had scratches all over her. The twins, not a mark.
Scratches on her neck, scratches on her chest, and she was hysterical. The girls, on the other hand, had no marks on them, no indication that really they had been in any kind of an altercation. Talking with them, I didn't believe a thing that the girls had said.
Despite everything, the court decided that Nikki and her daughters just needed counseling. They sent the twins to live with their great-grandmother temporarily. But a few months later, in January 2010, Nikki got custody back, and just 8 days later, she was dead.
As I was pulling out to get to the gate, the young lady stopped me, saying someone had killed her mother.
The crime scene was brutal. Nikki had been struck 80 times with a kitchen knife. Her spinal cord was almost severed. At first, Taz and Jazz told the police they came home from school and found their mother lying dead in the bathtub. They even put on an Oscar-worthy performance, crying and begging for their grandma.
I'm never gonna be happy now, because somebody was selfish and took my mom away from me.
But something wasn't right. For starters, the crying, completely tearless. Then, as the detectives tried to comfort them, one of the twins casually asked, "Can we watch CSI?" In the middle of a murder investigation,
They turned and looked at me and they said, "Can we watch CSI?" And immediately, the hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up. Essentially, it was right then, and it was like, okay, something was very, very off.
That was just the beginning of the red flags. The twins also insisted they had walked to school that morning, but security footage from a gas station nearby proved otherwise. They had actually gotten a ride. Their time frames were off. Their stories weren't matching up.
We were able to determine that they arrived there at mid-morning, where they told us they were only about 10 minutes late for school.
And then there was the evidence. The police found red bodily fluid all over the shoes hidden in their closet. The bathroom sink was scrubbed clean. A clump of hair was wrapped in a napkin and stuffed inside a shoe. It was all pointing to one horrifying truth. The killers were right in front of them.
But when that clump of hair has been pulled out of somebody's head and then has been wrapped in a napkin and stuffed into the toe of a shoe, you begin to realize that the twins were not telling us anything that was truthful.
But the biggest clue that cracked the case wide open? A bite mark on Tass's arm. At first, the twins claimed she bit herself when she was upset, but when detectives examined the mark, they discovered something horrifying. It was Nikki's bite. She had fought back, and she left a clue right on her daughter's skin.
To Nikki's credit, she did not go down without a fight, and she left evidence on one of her girls as a marker.
We had a dental examination of Nikki's teeth, and they matched it to the bite on the twins.
Despite so much evidence against them for months, the twins stuck to their story. But after 4 years of investigations, the evidence was too strong. Finally, they cracked.
I think I picked up a knife and I stabbed her.
Where did you stab her?
I think I stabbed her in the stomach. It was multiple times. I think I had her hands, I guess her feet. Kind of like a joint effort. She was heavy. We just put it in. The water was turned on.
At some point in time, you did realize that morning your mom was dead.
Yeah.
So what happened that morning that set the twins on such a dangerous path? Nikki tried to wake them up for school. They didn't want to go to school, so an argument broke out. And then, they snapped. They attacked her, striking her over and over. Nikki tried to escape, even ran to a neighbor's house for help. But the twins dragged her back inside and finished what they started.
What does she say when she's in the tub?
Kill me now and I'll kill y'all.
But what happened then?
She just, she went under a couple times and that was it.
If that wasn't disturbing enough, police later found a journal where the twins had written about their hatred for their mom and their plans to get rid of her. This wasn't just a crime of passion. In fact, many of the cases we explored here weren't crimes of passion. These kids had thought them through before taking action, whether it was out of trauma or just pure hatred. All of these stories are so shocking and heartbreaking. This case is a chilling reminder that even the people closest to us can harbor unthinkable darkness. The betrayal, the lies, and the coldness of it all make this one of the most disturbing family crimes in recent history. Hey, thank you for watching. Our deepest sympathies go to the family and friends involved in this horror. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you know of other similar cases? Let me know in the comments section, and before you go, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that bell button. See you next time, and stay safe.